If you think you know what happens behind bars in America, this story will change your mind. When the first whispers of a virus reached Rikers Island in early 2020, the men inside laughed. They'd heard rumors before, about riots, about new wardens, about hurricanes that never came. But this time, the storm wasn't outside. It was already inside, spreading cell to cell before anyone even realized what was happening. Rikers was a city within a city, a maze of steel doors and stale air sitting in the East River, just a few miles from Manhattan. To the public, it was a temporary holding facility. To those trapped behind its concrete walls, it was a forgotten island, overcrowded, underfunded, and festering with neglect long before the pandemic ever hit. Officer Gerald Torres had worked there for 14 years. He'd seen everything: gang wars over toothbrushes, hunger strikes, inmates setting fires just to get attention. But in March 2020, he saw something new: fear. Not the kind born from violence or punishment, but a quieter kind, invisible, suffocating. Inmates coughed through the night, guards wore masks made from ripped shirts, and the medical wing overflowed before the first week of lockdown even began. By mid-April, chaos ruled the island. Cells meant for 2 men now held 5. Soap ran out. The infirmary stopped accepting new patients. Officers refused to enter certain blocks. The air smelled of bleach and sweat, but not of safety. One inmate, a 38-year-old named Michael Rivera, had been awaiting trial for a non-violent offense, possession of stolen property. He'd been locked up for 8 months, stuck in legal limbo. Rivera was known among inmates as the preacher because he often tried to calm others down during fights. But by spring, even he began to crack. He kept a notebook, pages filled with dates, names, symptoms. He called it the death list. By May, 10 names were crossed out. The administration tried to keep it quiet. Official reports listed natural causes or pending autopsy, but everyone inside knew better. The virus was moving faster than truth. And the truth, like most things on Rikers, was always delayed, if it ever came at all. Torres, exhausted and guilt-ridden, began taking notes of his own. He documented who got sick, who got ignored, and who disappeared after coughing too loudly. He knew he was breaking protocol. Officers weren't supposed to keep personal records, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. Something the public wasn't meant to see. One morning in early June, he found a folded piece of paper wedged under the glass of his watch station. It was from Rivera. "They're locking us in and leaving us. No food. No meds. No doctors. If we die, tell them it wasn't the virus that killed us, it was neglect." That night, Block C went silent. 4 hours. Torres and 2 other officers tried radioing the control room, but no one answered. The next morning, a supervisor finally arrived, mask hanging from his neck, clipboard in hand. He ordered them to open the block. The air that escaped was thick and rancid. 2 men were dead. 3 more were barely conscious. And Rivera's notebook was gone. News broke days later about 2 COVID-related fatalities at Rikers Island. The report mentioned no names, no details, and certainly no notebook. But those who'd been there, the officers, the inmates, the medics, knew it was only the beginning. By summer, tempers ignited like dry wood. Guards refused shifts. Inmates banged on doors for medical attention. Videos leaked, grainy cell phone clips showing men screaming for help through cracked windows. The Department of Correction called them isolated incidents. But isolated didn't describe the smell that lingered in every hallway or the sounds that echoed through the nights: coughing, shouting, then silence. Torres began making copies of everything, every memo, every report. He told his wife he was keeping it for protection, just in case. But deep down, he knew he was preserving evidence. One August morning, as the heat inside the blocks reached unbearable levels, a transport van arrived for medical transfers. Rivera's name was on the list. But when the doors opened, he wasn't there. His cell was empty. His belongings gone. No record of transfer, no disciplinary note, no explanation. Torres asked around. The response was the same from everyone, a shrug, a muttered check with administration. But the administration had stopped answering questions weeks ago. That night, Torres went back to his post. The hallways were silent, but something glinted under the fluorescent light near Block C. He bent down and picked it up. It was a torn piece of notebook paper, smeared with something dark. Only one line was legible. "They moved us. Not to the hospital. Somewhere else." And for the first time in 14 years, Officer Torres felt something he hadn't felt since his first week on the job: pure, unfiltered fear. Because if Rivera was telling the truth, there was something happening on Rikers Island that no one outside would ever believe. But when Torres tried to report it the next morning, the files, the disappearances, the note, his supervisor interrupted him with a single warning: "Gerald, you didn't see anything. You understand?" And just like that, the conversation was over. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind that only grows before something explodes. Because in the days to come, Rikers Island wasn't just battling a virus. It was hiding one. And before the month was over, one more person would vanish, this time, not an inmate. When they unlocked the officer's locker that night, nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. When Officer Gerald Torres didn't report for duty the next morning, most of the staff didn't think twice. Absences had become normal on Rikers Island. Between the virus, fear, and exhaustion, half the roster was either calling out sick or missing shifts. But by the second day, word spread fast. Torres wasn't answering his phone, his car was still in the parking lot, and his locker was open. Inside that locker was nothing but an empty uniform sleeve, his ID card, and one folded page from the Department of Corrections' daily incident log. Except, this one wasn't the original, it was a photocopy. And at the bottom, written in black pen, was a single word that didn't belong there: buried. Captain Linda Morales, one of the few female supervisors still showing up for every shift, took one look at the note and knew something was wrong. She'd been on the island since the Giuliani years. She'd seen riots, stabbings, even murders covered up as accidents. But this was different. This felt orchestrated. By July 2020, Rikers wasn't a correctional facility anymore. It was a battlefield without gunfire, an invisible war between inmates desperate to survive and a staff struggling to pretend everything was fine. Guards covered their name tags with tape. Some inmates wore plastic garbage bags as makeshift PPE. The power flickered for hours at a time. And each day, more men disappeared from the rosters with no explanation. The city kept sending out press releases about progressive decarceration and temporary transfers for safety. Inside, nobody believed it. Morales decided to dig into Torres's last week of duty. His logbook showed dozens of entries marked with small, hand-drawn crosses, the same mark he used to note COVID deaths. But the last 3 crosses had no names beside them. Just numbers: C14, D22, E7. Those were housing units. She checked the camera logs for those areas. Half of them were blank. The hard drives had been corrupted, according to IT. The other half showed something stranger: medical vans entering the compound after midnight, their logos covered in black tape, escorted by uniformed men wearing no DOC insignia. That's when she realized this wasn't just negligence, it was coordination. Morales quietly reached out to a contact she trusted, a city nurse who'd been stationed at the Rikers infirmary before requesting reassignment to Bellevue Hospital. The nurse, speaking in a whisper over the phone, confirmed what Morales already suspected. "They're moving inmates at night," she said. "Saying they're transferring them for quarantine. But they never make it to the hospital. We checked the intake logs, no records. It's like they disappear mid-transfer." Morales pressed further, but the line went dead. That same evening, she received a brown envelope slid under her office door. Inside was a flash drive labeled R. It contained grainy footage from a cell phone camera, shaky, low-light video recorded by an inmate. The footage showed a corridor flooded in red emergency light. Voices echoed, coughing, footsteps, a door slamming. Then the camera turned just enough to catch a glimpse of something chilling. A group of inmates lined up against a wall, all wearing orange masks, as unidentified men in biohazard suits checked off names on a clipboard. At the very end of the clip, the camera caught the face of the man filming, Rivera. His eyes were wide, terrified, and he whispered something barely audible, "Tell them we're not dead yet." Morales froze. If this footage was real, it meant Rivera was alive, and that he'd somehow recorded his own abduction. She tried to forward the clip to her precinct email, but the system flagged it as restricted. Within minutes, her office phone rang. It was her superior, Deputy Warden Cranston, a man known for keeping his career clean by keeping his conscience quiet. "Captain Morales," he said coolly. "You've been looking at things outside your command. That's not your lane. I suggest you stop asking questions about Torres, or Rivera, if you want to keep your pension." Then he hung up. That night, Morales couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the footage over and over, the orange masks, the red light, Rivera's whisper. She decided to copy the drive and hide it in her locker. But when she returned to work the next day, her access badge no longer worked at the gate. "Administrative leave," the officer told her. "COVID exposure." But she hadn't tested positive. She hadn't even been tested. Meanwhile, inside the walls, the crisis grew darker. Inmates spoke in code through vents, rumors of the night trucks, whispers about tunnels under the old infirmary wing, and something they called the basement quarantine. By August, the number of transferred inmates had tripled. Officers were told to stop logging sick calls and to direct all complaints to health operations. But health operations wasn't on any map. A young correction officer named Malik Jones, who worked alongside Torres, began asking questions of his own. He was only 27, idealistic, still believing the job meant protecting people, not burying them. When he mentioned to a colleague that he thought Torres had been silenced, the colleague laughed nervously and said, "Then keep quiet before you join him." That weekend, Jones used his personal phone to record an after-hours patrol. The footage showed a convoy of vans heading toward a maintenance tunnel that hadn't been used in decades. Each van stopped briefly before entering. The last frame of his video captured a logo stenciled on one of the vans beneath the tape, City Medical Examiner's Office. Jones tried to upload the footage to his cloud drive, but the upload failed halfway through. Hours later, his phone was confiscated during a random inspection. When Morales heard about it, she knew what it meant: someone inside was cleaning house. Then, a week later, a letter arrived at the Daily News office in Manhattan. No return address. No sender name. Just a note written in block letters: "Check the old quarantine wing. The bodies aren't at Hart Island." Hart Island, New York's mass burial ground. That single sentence shook the city's press desks, but it was too vague to publish. The editor passed it to a junior reporter, a 26-year-old intern named Eva Carter, who decided to check it out anyway. She filed a formal records request to the Department of Correction asking for death certificates of all Rikers inmates between April and August 2020. Days later, her request was denied under public health confidentiality. But the next morning, an anonymous envelope arrived at her apartment. Inside was a single photo, grainy, nighttime, lit by a van's headlights. It showed men in hazmat suits loading body bags into the back of an unmarked truck. In the corner of the image, reflected in a puddle, was the faint shape of an ID badge lying face up on the ground. It read, "G. Torres." Eva felt a chill crawl up her spine. Because if the officer who vanished was now in that photo, one question remained: who took it, and how did it end up at her door? And even more haunting, why was the Department of Corrections still denying anything had ever happened? As she stared at the photo under the dim light of her kitchen, a realization crept in. Someone was trying to make sure the story stayed buried. But on Rikers Island, the truth doesn't stay buried for long. It leaks, through vents, through whispers, through the eyes of those who survive long enough to speak. And before the summer was over, Eva would learn that survival had a price. Because the island wasn't done claiming lives yet. Not by a long shot. The sky over Rikers Island was gray that September morning, the kind of heavy gray that presses down on you, thick with the smell of the East River. A helicopter circled once, low, before disappearing into the clouds. Below it, life on the island went on as if nothing had happened. But everyone, guards, inmates, and the few medical staff who still showed up, could feel something coming. Something was about to break. Eva Carter hadn't slept in 2 days. She was sitting in her tiny Brooklyn apartment surrounded by printouts, notes, and a map of Rikers spread across her kitchen table. Every lead she'd followed pointed to the same place, the old quarantine wing on the island's western edge, the one the city had decommissioned years before. The one everyone said didn't exist anymore. She tried calling the Department of Correction for comment, but her calls went straight to voicemail. She'd emailed the health department, no reply. And when she reached out to Captain Linda Morales, the message bounced back, recipient not found. Eva wasn't an investigative journalist, she was just an intern who refused to stop asking questions. But she knew what she had now, proof of something the city wanted gone. That night, she got an anonymous message through an encrypted email account. If you want the truth, come to the bridge. Midnight. Don't bring anyone. It was signed, simply, MJ. She didn't realize it until later, those initials belonged to Officer Malik Jones. When she arrived near the bridge that connected Rikers to Queens, she saw him waiting in the shadows, hood up, eyes darting between parked cars. He looked thinner, exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. "Eva," he said quietly, "I don't have much time. They're watching everything." But Torres was right. The transfers weren't transfers, they were cleanups. He handed her a flash drive. "Everything I've got is in here. Logs, footage, reports. And one more thing, audio from the control room." Before Eva could respond, a dark van turned the corner. Jones's expression changed instantly, from urgency to panic. "Go," he whispered, backing away. "If you don't hear from me by morning, you'll know why." The van's headlights cut through the mist, and in an instant, Jones was gone. Eva drove straight home and opened the files. Her laptop screen flickered with corrupted footage, frame after frame of midnight transfers, trucks entering unmarked tunnels, lists of names stamped transferred with no destinations. And at the end of one audio file, a voice she didn't recognize whispered into the radio, "Operation Zero Contact complete. Phase 2 initiated." That phrase, "zero contact," appeared again in an email log dated July 14, 2020. It was sent from a DOC administrator to a city contractor and read, "Per directive, isolate infected subjects. Report only recoveries. No press correspondence without clearance." Eva's heart pounded. It wasn't just negligence, it was a cover-up sanction from above. She knew she couldn't go to the police, some of them worked moonlighting shifts on the island. So she went public the only way she could. She uploaded everything to an encrypted online archive and sent the link to 3 major news outlets. Then she waited. Days passed. Nothing. No articles. No statements. No outrage. It was as if her upload had vanished, swallowed whole. Then, on a cold Friday morning, a small independent journalist website published a single headline: "Whistleblower claims secret COVID transfers at Rikers Island." Within hours, the page was offline. Servers crashed. The editor who'd approved the post resigned that afternoon. Eva's phone started buzzing with unknown numbers. When she picked up once, a voice said calmly, "Stop digging. The city's clean now. Don't become part of what you're chasing." She moved her notes into a storage locker in Queens and deleted every local copy of the files. But one night, as she sat alone reviewing a printed page from Torres's logs, she noticed something she'd missed before. At the bottom corner of the last page, faint but visible under the fluorescent light, was a stamp, City Emergency Management Unit, Annex Wing 3B. The annex wasn't supposed to exist. But according to old blueprints she found, 3B was directly below the old quarantine wing, the same area everyone had been talking about for months. The truth hit her like a wave. The missing inmates weren't transferred off the island. They were moved underground. She reached out to one last source, a sanitation contractor who'd worked the night shift at Rikers. When she asked about 3B, he hesitated. "Don't ask me about that place," he said quietly. "All I'll say is, they were burning medical waste down there, but none of it looked like equipment." That was the last conversation she ever had about it. Weeks later, as the city began reopening, a construction crew discovered a sealed tunnel entrance while preparing to demolish part of the western wing. The official report called it a structural anomaly. Within hours, the area was closed off. The demolition was postponed indefinitely. No statement from the mayor's office. No explanation from the Department of Correction. And just like that, Rikers Island went back to being what it had always been, a rumor wrapped in concrete, guarded by silence. But inside that silence, the story refused to die. Guards still whispered about the night trucks. Inmates still told newcomers about the preacher who kept a notebook of the dead. And sometimes, during late rounds, officers swore they could hear faint coughing through the walls of the closed quarantine wing. Eva eventually left New York. She never published the full story, not because she didn't want to, but because no one would believe it without proof. Still, every now and then, she receives an email from a blocked address. No text, just a single attachment, an image. Each one shows a different angle of the island. Some from drones, some from the water. But in every photo, there's always a shadow, a figure standing near the edge of the old medical building, facing the city skyline. In the last image she received, the figure was wearing an officer's uniform. The nameplate glinted under the faint light. Torres. And in that moment, she realized the same thing everyone who's ever worked on Rikers eventually learns: no one really leaves the island. Some just stop being counted. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.